Well, we're in a series in the book of Habakkuk. And so if you got your Bible, got your device, I would love for you to turn with me there. If you go, Habakkuk, I've never heard of that book. Look in the table of contents. You can find it that way as well. If you don't own a Bible, we would love to give you one. And so on your way out, if you want to swing by the Connect table, there's Bibles on that table. Just grab one and take it with you, and you can use it throughout the week and then bring it back every single Sunday as we unpack what God's Word has for us. In case you haven't been with us the last couple of weeks, let me just quickly catch you up in the book of Habakkuk, because there's something about the prophets that if we read the prophets, the Old Testament prophets, there's 17 of them, 5 major, which just means they're big books, 12 minor, which just means they're smaller books. I'm going to guess that those aren't the books that you normally turn to when you want to hear from God. Like, it's not normally the books that you go, man, I need to hear from a word. Let's turn to Zephaniah. Like, I'm just going to guess that's not where you go. And so let me catch you up a little bit on the prophets and then a little bit of Habakkuk. Habakkuk is the only prophet that really essentially is going to God on behalf of the people. All the other prophets, they're going from God to the people saying, guys, if you don't do this, if you don't repent, if you don't return to God, this is going to happen. Whereas Habakkuk, in the first 4 verses of the book of Habakkuk, he goes to God and says, God, how can you be letting this thing happen to our people? Like, they're turning to idolatry. They're rebelling. They're doing things that don't honor and please you. Like, what are you going to do? Like, can you please do something? And that's the first 4 verses. And then the next handful of verses is God's response. And in verse 5, he essentially tells Habakkuk, hey, I'm going to do something in your day that even if I told you right now, you wouldn't believe it. And we said a couple weeks ago that gets us excited, that most of us, when we hear that from God, would go, yes, he's going to do something that's going to blow our minds. And he does, but in the next verse, he says, hey, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to raise up the Babylonians, the Chaldeans, and I'm going to raise them up. And they're actually going to send you into exile. They're actually going to overtake you, and that's what I'm going to do. And then we talked about how, like, that wasn't the news that Habakkuk wanted. And we started asking ourselves the question a couple weeks ago, like, what do we do when we hear something from the Lord that we don't want to hear? Like, what does it look like when we ask God questions like Habakkuk does, and then the answer that we hear is like, we're going to raise up the Chaldeans. And this is how the Babylonians, the Chaldeans, this is how they're described. They're ruthless. They're feared. They're dreaded. Their horses are swifter than leopards. They fly like eagles. They mock the kings. They scoff at rulers, like yada, yada, yada. Like, that's what we learn about the Babylonians. You can imagine Habakkuk going, well, that's not what I wanted to hear. And so maybe you've been in that position. Maybe you've been in that season of life where you asking what you hear from the Lord is not what you wanted. And like, I kind of think Habakkuk's in that, like, well, man, I immediately regret this decision. You know, he's like, I don't know what I wanted. There's this scene in the movie Anchorman, if you've ever seen it. If you haven't, that's probably a good thing. But if you've ever seen the movie Anchorman, like Ron Burgundy, played by Will Ferrell, his love interest falls into the bear pit. And he's like, I'm going to go get her. And he jumps in the bear pit. And then he immediately is like, I immediately regret this decision. You know, and it's like, why did I do this? What am I thinking, right? And so I can imagine that Habakkuk, this is kind of where he finds himself. Asking God questions, and the answer that he gets from God isn't what he wanted, or at least it's just not what he understands. At this point, I can just imagine Habakkuk being like, well, never mind, God. Like, I'm sorry to bother you. I'm sorry to bring this up. Like, I'm just going to go back doing what I've been doing. Like, let's just pretend this conversation never happened. But that's not what he does. So what I want to do this morning is I want to continue the conversation. So if the first 4 verses was Habakkuk going to God, and then the next handful of verses was God going back to Habakkuk, what we're going to look at in verse 12, and as we finish out the chapter, is now Habakkuk going back to God. And so this is how Habakkuk responds to the news that he's just received in verse 12. He says, are you not from eternity, Lord my God? My Holy One, you will not die. Lord, you appointed them to execute judgment. My rock, you destined them to punish us. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil, and you can't tolerate wrongdoing. So why do you tolerate those who are treacherous? Why are you silent while one who is wicked swallows up one who is more righteous than himself? So in verse 12, he begins by kind of asking like 2 rhetorical questions, right? Lord, are you not from eternity? Lord, are you not eternal? And listen, of course, Habakkuk knows the answer to these questions, but I think we find Habakkuk struggling to reconcile his theology of God, like what he knows about God, with the word of God that has just been revealed to him. And maybe you've been there, where like what you know about God, what you understand about God isn't matching up with what he's doing in this present moment. Like maybe there's been a situation that's happened, maybe something bad has happened to somebody else. You're like, this isn't what I think that God should do. This isn't what I know about him. He just doesn't understand, though. That's where Habakkuk's at. He just doesn't understand how appointing the Babylonians to come and exile the people of God is actually a good thing. Like, actually, it doesn't make any sense. But Habakkuk also knows just because he doesn't understand doesn't mean that his theology is wrong. It doesn't mean that God isn't on his throne. It doesn't mean his God is doing exactly what he should be doing. And how do I know that? The way that he interacts with God here. There's three things that Habakkuk says, right? The first thing he says is, my God. Now, it's easy when things don't go your way to start distancing yourself from God, right? Think about it. When things don't go your way, most of us, I know this isn't everybody, but most of us, when things don't go our way, instead of running to God, we run away from him, right? Instead of running to God's word, what we do is we often go, I don't even want to read that. I'm so frustrated with God right now. I'm so angry with what's happening in my life right now. I'm not even going to read it. And what Habakkuk's doing in the midst of not knowing what's coming next, he still can say, my God, which gives us the indication that there's a personal relationship. But not only does he say, my God, he also claims who he is, the Holy One. God, I know in this midst that my theology isn't matching up, or like what I understand isn't matching up to what I'm seeing, but I still know that you're my God, and I still know that you are holy. You're still the Holy One. And because you're my God, and because you're the Holy One, he says, you're my rock. He says, you're the one that I'm going to turn to. You're the one I'm going to go to when everything around me seems to crumble. When everything is shifting sand, you're the rock. And this same language of the rock that we see here in Habakkuk, like transfers to the New Testament when Jesus is declared the rock. So three things that Habakkuk says, my God, you're the Holy One, you're my rock. And then in verse 13, he's gonna move and he's gonna make two statements, and then he's gonna follow that by two questions. So right here's the first statement. You're holy, you're my God, you're my rock, and I know this because you're too pure to look on evil. This is the first statement. You're too pure. The second statement is, hey, listen, not only are you too pure, but I know that you can't tolerate wrongdoing, which leads him to the questions. So if I know these things to be true, if I know you're too good to look on evil, if I know that you can't tolerate wrongdoing, here's my question. So why do you tolerate those who are treacherous? Why are you silent? You see, what we see from Habakkuk is very similar to what we saw in verses 1-4, wrestling with this tension. And I continue to want to draw this out in Habakkuk because I want us to understand the tension that is there. Because what we said the first week we studied Habakkuk is it's okay to ask questions. We want this church to be a place where you feel comfortable coming and asking questions, not pretending like you have it all together. Habakkuk is the prime example of this. Like just going, I don't understand. He doesn't get it. And then in verse 14-16, Habakkuk goes, like he's asked these questions, and then he says, hey, God, let me just remind you of who these Babylonians, let me just remind you of who the Chaldeans, let me just remind you who they are, right? Look at verse 14. He says that you have made mankind like the fish of the sea, like marine creatures that have no ruler. The Chaldeans have pulled them all up with a hook. They've catched them in their dragnet, their net, and they've gathered them in their fishing net. That is why they, the Babylonians, are glad and rejoicing. This is why they sacrifice to the dragnet and burn incense to their fishing net. For by these things their portion is rich and their food is plentiful. Basically, Habakkuk is saying, like, God, have you forgotten about us a little bit? Like, do you know, do you remember who these people are? Do you know who these people are? Are you really going to use the Babylonians, the Chaldeans, are you really going to use them to exercise control over us? Like, they're more godless. Like, I know I complain to you about who the people are, what they're doing, but the Babylonians are worse than we are. God, why are you doing this? Are these godless people being rewarded more and more for their godless acts? And of course, the answer is no. But again, you can see that Habakkuk just doesn't understand what God's up to. And then in verse 17, he poses a question as to whether the wickedness of the Babylonians will be allowed to continue. And he says, will they therefore empty their net and continually slaughter nations without mercy? This is again, that same question, like how long? Like, Lord, how long are you going to allow us to be in this place? How long are you going to allow us to suffer? How long is it going to seem like this other nation is being rewarded who's more wicked than we are? How long, oh Lord? And then in chapter 2, verse 1, Habakkuk concludes, and this is one of my favorite verses in the entirety of Habakkuk. I love this. He says this at the end of like his second spiel to God. He says, okay, I will stand at my guard post, station myself on the lookout tower. I will watch to see what he will say to me and what I should reply about my complaint. So I picture Habakkuk like folding his arms and go, okay, fine. I'm waiting. Like, I'm just going to stand here. I'm just going to wait. I know that you're going to move. I know that you're going to do something. So I'm just going to sit here. And I'm just going to wait. I'm going to sit on my watchtower, and I'm going to wait. And I'm going to look. I'm going to be waiting. And when you do, I'll be ready. I'll be ready to anticipate, right? That's what he's doing. He's having one of those moments where he knows there's greater purpose in what God is doing. He just can't see it. So he waits, and he sits back, and he watches. And this is his second question to God. Now, here's what I want to do this morning. Because what we've seen in the first 4 verses and what we've seen here is Habakkuk kind of like, he's coming to God with just kind of going, I don't know. And one of the things I've said is it's okay to come with that posture, but he comes not with an arrogance or not with an angry attitude, but like with humility, with grace. And so I want us to look at this morning. I want us to understand, and I want us to tackle this question for the rest of our time. It seems that Habakkuk understands his position before the Lord. It seems that Habakkuk seems to understand his posture. And every time he approaches God, every time. So I want to ask us this morning, do we understand our position before God? That's the question that I want to tackle. Do we understand our position? So let me try to make sense of what I mean when I talk about our position before God. So the way that Caroline, my wife, the way that we argue or the way that we have conversation or the way that we have dialogue is a little different than the rest of my kids. And if I just blew your mind by saying that the pastor and his wife argue, I'm sorry. It only happens like once a year because we're pretty much perfect. So it happens very rarely, but in occasion, like it does happen. Like so, the way that we have that argument goes a lot differently than the way that argument might go with my kids, right? I don't tend to argue a whole lot unless, like, if I know that I'm pretty much right, that's when I'll have the argument. If I just think I'm pretty good at going, you know what, you could be right, but there's no sense getting in the argument with this. Like, but if I think I'm about like 98% right, man, I'm all in. Like, let's have this argument. Do you want me to ask Google? Like we can do. Like I love that. But in all of that, the way that we interact with each other, we keep our position with each other in mind, meaning that neither one of us lord over the other. We have a conversation, we might get heated, our voices may get raised, but we understand our position towards each other. So let me just give you some examples. My wife loves to have these like DIY projects, do-it-yourself projects. Like she loves it. And so the joke in our house is if I go away for a work trip, like let's say I go away on a Friday night, I'll come back on Sunday night, and there's a great chance that something in our house is gonna be different than it was when I left. Like she loves to fix up the bathrooms, she wants to redo the fireplace, man, she wants to go outside and like just go all out. And for the most part, like I'm okay with this. Like I'm okay with it. Like so when I come home, most of the time, I'm like, hey, that looks beautiful, man, great, that's fantastic. Like I'll come home and it's like fixer-upper in our house. And I'm like, okay, we're okay here, right? We'll have a conversation about it. I'm okay. Or maybe we're gonna go out for dinner and I'll ask her like, hey, babe, what do you want for dinner? And she'll say, oh, I don't care, whatever you want. And I'll go, no, it's up to you. You tell me. And then she'll go, no, you pick. And I'll throw out like 10 restaurants. She's like, no, No. Why don't you just pick? Like, they just go ahead and pick. But even in that conversation, like, we can still have like a good dialogue going back and forth, and we'll figure out like the place that we want to go eat, and that's fine. Or maybe like I'm having a bad day. Rarely happens, but maybe I am, and she can look at me, and if I'm angry or a little bit upset or like a little bit irritated, she can look at me and she can say like, hey, just stop acting like a baby. And I can go, you know what? Because I'm a good husband, I always say, you're right. You're so right. Like, you know me better than myself, and yeah, you're closer to God than I am, so you're right. You know, like that's how so positioning matters, right? Now, picture all of those conversations with any of my kids. Let's just use Boston because I love to throw him under the bus the most. Let's just pretend it's Boston. If I go away and I come home and Boston is dismantling the fireplace, we're gonna have some questions. We're gonna have a conversation about why in the world you thought it was within your right to destroy my fireplace, right? Or if we start having a conversation regarding food, and I throw out some restaurants to go to, and Boston says, I don't want any of that. That's disgusting. I don't want that. He's gonna be eating that for the rest of his life, right? That's just how the conversation's gonna go. Or maybe on one of those like rare days where I'm a mean parent and angry, or maybe I'm just quick to call out something. If Boston looks at me and says, hey, Dad, stop acting like a baby, he's gonna cry. And I'm gonna show him how much babies cry, right? Like the position absolutely matters, right? Most of us approach God not understanding our position. Most of us, we come to God with a preconceived notion. We come to God with a plan, and we say, God, we want you to fit what your will is into that plan. That's how most of us approach God. We come, God, I know that this dating relationship isn't something I should be in, but God, if you could just approve of this, like that would be great. Like everybody else is telling you, don't go in that relationship, don't do it, it's not worth it. And you're like, but I'm pretty sure I heard from the Lord and he said it was okay. You have a preconceived notion that you're coming into and wanting God to fit in that. Or maybe it's your job. Like you have a potential career move, and the job that you're gonna take is gonna make you, work 70, 80 hours every single week, not just for a season, but every single week. It's gonna allow you not to ever be at your kids' stuff. It's gonna pull you away from everything. And you're like, you know what, God, but I really want it. Like, I think it'll be really good for me. So I think I'm gonna do it. This is how so many of us, this is how we approach God. We have a plan, we have an agenda, we have something that we want God to approve. And so our position is, God, like, I know that you're a little bit above me, but I'm really close. Like, I'm like right there. And our position is, as we come to God, not as humble servants the way that Habakkuk is coming, but of men and women to go, but this is what I want, and God, I need you to match up with what I want. Like, if as you spend time with the Lord and as you read the word, like if there aren't moments where the preconceived notion that you had, you read this and go, oh man, I was way off. If that doesn't happen frequently, I might want to challenge you just a little bit. Just a little bit. Maybe God's ways are bigger than your ways. Maybe his ways are higher than your ways. Maybe he knows better than you do. And maybe that should be the posture with which we come. Now, why does all this matter? Why does it matter that we understand our position before the Lord? Here's why it's such a big deal. Because few of us have any real ability to grasp and comprehend how our behavior today creates a mess of things tomorrow. I want to say it again. The reason why your positioning before the Lord absolutely matters is because few of us have any real ability to grasp and comprehend how our behaviors today can create a mess of things tomorrow. We don't understand how the internet, although can be a great thing, has a complete dark side as well. Like, we know it here, but we don't live that way, right? Like I love the fact that we have the internet. Like I love that we have all kinds of information at our fingertips. Like it is absolutely great that we have that. Like, if you're 35 or younger, you don't know what it's like to have to go to the grocery store and buy Encyclopedia Britannica A and B volume because you can't afford all of them yet, and go and buy A and B, and then the next time you go to the grocery store, you buy C and D, and the next time you go to the grocery store, whatever the next is, E and F, and you go all the way to Z, and by the time you get to Z, they've come out with another A and B. Like you don't understand what it's like to have to go and do that. Like, man, we were so proud. My family was so proud when we got all of the Encyclopedia Britannica that we could show our neighbors. We are smart. We've got it all in a dictionary. We have a dictionary in the Encyclopedia Britannica. That's what we got. You gotta know, man, I remember we used to love when the newspaper would come out because that's when we could find out when the movie times were. Oh, man, I love that paper. You could go and see, oh, man, Back to the Future is coming out at 7:30. It's the only showing, so if we miss it, you miss it. And I still remember we didn't have anything to distract us from family game nights. Gosh, I hated family game nights, and my parents loved it. And we would come, and I didn't have a phone to distract myself. Now my kids are like looking around. They have everything to distract them. You just don't get it. So there's some great things that come. I mean, like, listen, all we have to do, I'm not going to do it because all of our phones are going to go off, but all you have to do is say, okay, Siri, okay, Google. See, it's just going off. Phones are going off. Oh, I know. Not exactly. Thank you. It's crazy. But there's this commercial that happens where there's this daughter who's like, they're reading a book with her dad, and like every time a question comes up, like she asked her dad, like, how big is the whale? How much does, like, where do they live? And like he just asks Google over and over and over again. It's like, it's crazy how much information we have at our fingertips. Like as a parent, honestly, can I let you in? My kids are back there. Sometimes, whenever they ask a bunch of questions, just to get them to stop asking me questions, I'll say, go ask Google. Just to go ask. Because I don't know the answer, just go talk to the device. Like we have this at our fingertips. But do you know that you can track the growth of internet pornography with the growth of sexual abuse and assault? You can track it. Like as internet pornography has grown, so has sexual assault and abuse. What used to be very difficult to get your hands on and you had to do it and like go out in public, now you can do in the privacy of your own home. No one knows. The internet, it's also made so many relationships shallow. Like we think we have a ton of friends on Facebook and on Instagram or Be Real or whatever it is you guys are using these days. Like we have a ton of friends, but like relationships are so shallow. Like I remember as a student pastor, yes, I was a student pastor. I was an amazing student pastor. I remember like people would get mad at each other because of something that they saw on social media. And instead of like actually going to the person, they would then respond with something on social media. And then I was like, guys, can we just get together? Can we just come together? And I would get them together. And the first person that got mad at the person actually took what they said out of context. And I was like, we could have solved this problem 6 months ago if you guys would have just talked and not text message, talk. It's crazy. And listen, I'm not just talking to kids, man, I'm talking to adults. And we can all get mad about things. Like, have you ever gotten a little bit upset because of something you saw on social media? How dare they? Or how about our fixation with fast food? Man, we love fast food. And maybe I'm just preaching to myself right now. Gosh, I love fast food. Man. Chick-fil-A, gosh, the Lord's chicken. It's so good. And I know, like, here's what happens with Chick-fil-A. Because it's the Lord's chicken, we think it's good for us. We're eating fried chicken. It's not good. It's not healthy unless you get the salad. But who goes to Chick-fil-A to get a salad? Weirdos. My wife does that. We try so hard. Position matters. You don't understand the effects that happen today impact the future. Your position matters because you don't know. But God does. Our position before God is so important because it reminds us of who we serve. It reminds us who is God, who is in control. It reminds us that we're finite creatures and He is infinite. Right? I mean, have you ever noticed that a child can ask the same question, but depending on how they ask it is determines your response that you give. Like when I'm at home, like 87% of my life revolves around like getting my kids something, right? Parents, you get this. Like the second that you sit down, it's like, ooh, I'm back up again. What do you need? It's like, okay, everybody good? Everybody's good, right? Fantastic. You go sit back down. Dad, what do you need? You pop back up and it's like, all right, what do you need? But here's the thing. If my kids say please and thank you, most of the time, I don't care. Most of the time, it doesn't bother me. But Dad, do this. I'll be there in a minute. Which my kids now know means Dad's never doing it. How you approach God matters. Like, I think we understand how our position, I think we understand it. But I think if we treated other people the way that we treated God, I don't know if we'd have many friends. Can I say it like that? I think if the way that we approached God was the way that we approached our friends, I think that maybe some of our friends would be like, you know what? Like, I'm better off without you. Our position matters. I know it matters with other people, so why wouldn't it matter with Jesus as well? Like, do you remember, and maybe you don't, but when Jesus was crucified on the cross, there were two people, thieves on his right and on his left. And as he's being crucified, one of the thieves, mocks Jesus and says this, if you are the Son of Man, why don't you save yourself and us too? Like mocking Jesus, just like, if you are this person, why don't you do something? And then the other thief on the other side says to the thief, like, don't you fear God? We're being punished justly, for we're getting what our deeds, what our works deserve. But Jesus, he's done nothing wrong. And then Jesus looks at this thief and says, today you're going to be with me in paradise. Your position matters. And so many of us, the way that we approach God, the way that we approach his throne is with entitlement, with I deserve it. I've worked so hard, so I should get here. And I think what Habakkuk wants to teach us in his second interaction with the Lord is not that we can't come to God. On the contrary, Jesus says to us, like, all ye who are heavy laden, all you who need some rest, like, come to me and you can find it. So it's not that God doesn't want us to come to him. It's the position as we come. It's the posture as we come. I think it absolutely matters. The reason it matters is because Jesus has done what we could not, lived the perfect life that you and I couldn't live, died the death that you and I deserve, is the King, and is waiting for us. And so I don't know where you're at this morning, whether you've been walking with Jesus for years, or maybe you're here this morning still trying to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Like, I think I want us to hear from Habakkuk how we approach Jesus matters. And so maybe this morning, like, maybe our approach needs to be, God, I've been running for a long time and I'm tired of running. Or maybe our approach needs to be, Father, I've never had a relationship with you. Like, God, here I am. Like, speak to me. Or maybe when you read his word this week, it's a posture of, God, I want to hear from you. I don't want you to hear from me. And maybe, like, that's part of it. I want to hear from you. What would you have of my life? I want you to think about this. What would it be like if those who call Radiant home, those who gather here Sunday after Sunday, what would it be like if our position before God was grace and humility, ready to hear whatever he would have for us? Think about how we could impact the community around us. Think about how that posture would change, because if that's your posture with Jesus, I know it's going to be your posture with others as well. And when others see that, life change begins to happen. What's your positioning before Jesus? Let me pray.